1. When Cyrus had brought his life to an end, Cambyses received the royal power in succession, being the son of Cyrus and of Cassindae the daughter of Pharnaspes, for whose death, which came about before his own, Cyrus had made great mourning himself and also had proclaimed to all those over whom he bore rule that they should make mourning for her. Cambyses, I say, being the son of this woman and of Cyrus, regarded the Ionians and Aeolians as slaves inherited from his father, and he proceeded to march an army against Egypt, taking with him as helpers not only the other nations of which he was the ruler, but also those of the Hellenes over whom he had power besides. 2. Now the Egyptians, before the time when Psammetichos I became king over them, were wont to suppose that they had come into being first of all men, but since the time when Psammetichos having become king desired to know what men had come into being first, they supposed that the Phrygians came into being before themselves, but they themselves before all other men. Now Psammetichos, when he was not able by inquiry to find out any means of knowing who had come into being first of all men, contrived a device of the following kind. Taking 2 newborn children belonging to persons of the common sort, he gave them to a shepherd to bring up at the place where his flocks were, with a manner of bringing up such as I shall say, charging him namely that no man should utter any word in their presence, and that they should be placed by themselves in a room where none might come, and at the proper time he should bring to them she-goats, and when he had satisfied them with milk he should do for them whatever else was needed. These things Psammetichos did and gave him this charge, wishing to hear what word the children would let break forth first, after they had ceased from wailings without sense. And accordingly so it came to pass, for after a space of 2 years had gone by, during which the shepherd went on acting so, at length, when he opened the door and entered, both the children fell before him in entreaty and uttered the word Bekos, stretching forth their hands. At first when he heard this the shepherd kept silence, but since this word was often repeated, as he visited them constantly and attended to them, at last he declared the matter to his master, and at his command he brought the children before his face. Then Psammetichos, having himself also heard it, began to inquire about what nation of men named anything Bekos, and inquiring he found that the Phrygians had this name for bread. In this manner, and guided by an indication such as this, the Egyptians were brought to allow that the Phrygians were a more ancient people than themselves. 3. That so it came to pass I heard from the priests of that Hephaestos who dwells at Memphis. 2. But the Hellenes relate, besides many other idle tales, that Psammetichos cut out the tongues of certain women, and then caused the children to live with these women. With regard then to the rearing of the children, they related so much as I have said, and I heard also other things at Memphis when I had speech with the priests of Hephaestos. Moreover, I visited both Thebes and Heliopolis 3 for this very cause, namely because I wished to know whether the priests at these places would agree in their accounts with those at Memphis, for the men of Heliopolis are said to be the most learned in records of the Egyptians. Those of their narrations which I heard with regard to the gods I am not earnest to relate in full, but I shall name them only, for because I consider that all men are equally ignorant of these matters. 5. And whatever things of them I may record, I shall record only because I am compelled by the course of the story. But as to those matters which concern men, the priests agreed with one another in saying that the Egyptians were the first of all men on earth to find out the course of the year, having divided the seasons into 12 parts to make up the whole, and this they said they found out from the stars, and they reckoned to this extent more wisely than the Hellenes, as it seems to me, inasmuch as the Hellenes throw in an intercalated month every other year, to make the seasons right, whereas the Egyptians, reckoning the 12 months at 30 days each, bring in also every year 5 days beyond the number, and thus the circle of their seasons is completed and comes round to the same point whence it set out. They said moreover that the Egyptians were the first who brought into use appellations for the 12 gods, and the Hellenes took up the use from them, and that they were the first who assigned altars and images and temples to the gods, and who engraved figures on stones, and with regard to the greater number of these things they showed me by actual facts that they had happened so. They said also that the first man 6 who became king of Egypt was Min, 7, and that in his time all Egypt except the district of Thebes 8 was a swamp, and none of the regions were then above water which now lie below the lake of Moares, to which lake it is a voyage of 7 days up the river from the sea. 5. And I thought that they said well about the land, for it is manifest in truth even to a person who has not heard it beforehand but has only seen, at least if he have understanding, that the Egypt to which the Hellenes come in ships is a land which has been won by the Egyptians as an addition, and that it is a gift of the river. Moreover, the regions which lie above this lake also for a distance of 3 days' sail, about which they did not go on to say anything of this kind, are nevertheless another instance of the same thing, for the nature of the land of Egypt is as follows. First, when you are still approaching it in a ship and are distant a day's run from the land, if you let down a sounding line you will bring up mud and will find yourself in 11 fathoms. This then so far shows that there is a silting forward of the land. 6. Then secondly, as to Egypt itself, the extent of it along the sea is 60 skoines, according to our definition of Egypt as extending from the Gulf of Plinthine to the Serbonian Lake, along which stretches Mount Cassion. From this lake then 9 the 60 skoines are reckoned, for those of men who are poor in land have their country measured by fathoms, those who are less poor by furlongs, those who have much land by parasangs, and those who have land in very great abundance by skoines. Now, the parasang is equal to 30 furlongs, and each skoin, which is an Egyptian measure, is equal to 60 furlongs. So there would be an extent of 3,600 furlongs for the coastland of Egypt. 10. 7. From thence and as far as Heliopolis inland Egypt is broad, and the land is all flat and without springs of water. 11 and formed of mud, and the road as one goes inland from the sea to Heliopolis is about the same in length as that which leads from the altar of the 12 gods at Athens to Pisa and the temple of Olympian Zeus. Reckoning up you would find the difference very small by which these roads fail of being equal in length, not more indeed than 15 furlongs, for the road from Athens to Pisa wants 15 furlongs of being 1,500, while the road to Heliopolis from the sea reaches that number completely. 8. From Heliopolis, however, as you go up, Egypt is narrow, for on the one side a mountain range belonging to Arabia stretches along by the side of it, going in a direction from north towards the midday and the south wind, tending upwards without a break to that which is called the Erythraean Sea, in which range are the stone quarries which were used in cutting stone for the pyramids at Memphis. On this side then the mountain ends where I have said, and then takes a turn back, 12 and where it is widest, as I was informed, it is a journey of 2 months across from east to west, and the borders of it which turn towards the east are said to produce frankincense. Such then is the nature of this mountain range, and on the side of Egypt towards Libya another range extends, rocky and enveloped in sand. In this are the pyramids, and it runs in the same direction as those parts of the Arabian mountains which go towards the midday. So then, I say, from Heliopolis the land has no longer a great extent so far as it belongs to Egypt. 13 And for about 14 days sail up the river Egypt properly so called is narrow, and the space between the mountain ranges which have been mentioned is plain land, but where it is narrowest it did not seem to me to exceed 200 furlongs from the Arabian mountains to those which are called the Libyan. After this again Egypt is broad. 9. Such is the nature of this land, and from Heliopolis to Thebes is a voyage up the river of 9 days, and the distance of the journey in furlongs is 4,860, the number of the skoines being 81. If these measures of Egypt in furlongs be put together the result is as follows. I have already before this shown that the distance along the sea amounts to 3,600 furlongs, and I will now declare what the distance is inland from the sea to Thebes, namely 6,120 furlongs, and again the distance from Thebes to the city called Elephantine is 1,800 furlongs. 10. Of this land then, concerning which I have spoken, it seemed to myself also, according as the priest said, that the greater part had been won as an addition by the Egyptians, for it was evident to me that the space between the aforesaid mountain ranges, which lie above the city of Memphis, once was a gulf of the sea, like the regions about Ilion and Tithrania and Ephesos and the plain of the Meander, if it be permitted to compare small things with great, and small these are in comparison. For of the rivers which heaped up the soil in those regions none is worthy to be compared in volume with a single one of the mouths of the Nile, which has 5 mouths. 15 Moreover there are other rivers also, not in size at all equal to the Nile, which have performed great feats, of which I can mention the names of several, and especially the Achelous, which flowing through Acarnania and so issuing out into the sea has already made half of the Echinides from islands into mainland. 11 Now there is in the land of Arabia, not far from Egypt, a gulf of the sea running in from that which is called the Erythraean Sea, very long and narrow, as I am about to tell. With respect to the length of the voyage along it, one who set out from the innermost point to sail out through it into the open sea, would spend 40 days upon the voyage, using oars, 16, and with respect to breadth, where the gulf is broadest it is half a day's sail across, and there is in it an ebb and flow of tide every day. Just such another gulf I suppose that Egypt was, and that the one ran in towards Ethiopia from the northern sea, and the other, the Arabian, of which I am about to speak, 17 tended from the south towards Syria, the gulfs boring in so as almost to meet at their extreme points, and passing by one another with but a small space left between. If then the stream of the Nile should turn aside into this Arabian Gulf, what would hinder that gulf from being filled up with silt as the river continued to flow, at all events within a period of 20,000 years? Indeed, for my part, one am of opinion that it would be filled up even within 10,000 years. How, then, in 18 all the time that has elapsed before I came into being, should not a gulf be filled up even of much greater size than this by a river so great and so active? 12. As regards Egypt then, I both believe those who say that things are so, and for myself also I am strongly of opinion that they are so, because I have observed that Egypt runs out into the sea further than the adjoining land, and that shells are found upon the mountains of it, and an efflorescence of salt forms upon the surface, so that even the pyramids are being eaten away by it, and moreover that of all the mountains of Egypt, the range which lies above Memphis is the only one which has sand, besides which I notice that Egypt resembles neither the land of Arabia, which borders upon it, nor Libya, nor yet Syria, for they are Syrians who dwell in the parts of Arabia lying along the sea, but that it is soil which is black and easily breaks up, 19 seeing that it is in truth mud and silt brought down from Ethiopia by the river, but the soil of Libya, we know, is reddish in color and rather sandy, while that of Arabia and Syria is somewhat clayey and rocky. 1901. 13. The priests also gave me a strong proof concerning this land as follows, namely that in the reign of King Muares, whenever the river reached a height of at least 8 cubits 20 it watered Egypt below Memphis, and not yet 900 years had gone by since the death of Muares, when I heard these things from the priests. Now however, unless the river rises to 16 cubits, or 15 at the least, it does not go over the land. I think too that those Egyptians who dwell below the lake of Muares and especially in that region which is called the Delta, if that land continues to grow in height according to this proportion and to increase similarly in extent, 21 will suffer for all remaining time, from the Nile not overflowing their land, that same thing which they themselves said that the Hellenes would at some time suffer. For hearing that the whole land of the Hellenes has rain and is not watered by rivers as theirs is, they said that the Hellenes would at some time be disappointed of a great hope and would suffer the ills of famine. This saying means that if the god 22 shall not send them rain, but shall allow drought to prevail for a long time, the Hellenes will be destroyed by hunger, for they have in fact no other supply of water to save them except from Zeus alone. 14. This has been rightly said by the Egyptians with reference to the Hellenes, but now let me tell how matters are with the Egyptians themselves in their turn. If, in accordance with what I before said, their land below Memphis, for this is that which is increasing, shall continue to increase in height according to the same proportion as in past time, assuredly those Egyptians who dwell here will suffer famine, if their land shall not have rain nor the river be able to go over their fields. It is certain, however, that now they gather in fruit from the earth with less labor than any other men and also with less than the other Egyptians, for they have no labor in breaking up furrows with a plough nor in hoeing nor in any other of those labors which other men have about a crop, but when the river has come up of itself and watered their fields and after watering has left them again, then each man sows his own field and turns into it swine, and when he has trodden the seed into the ground by means of the swine, after that he waits for the harvest, and when he has threshed the corn by means of the swine, then he gathers it in. 15. If we desire to follow the opinions of the Ionians as regards Egypt, who say that the delta alone is Egypt, reckoning its seacoast to be from the watchtower called of Perseus to the fish-curing houses of Pelusium, a distance of 40 skoinas, and counting it to extend inland as far as the city of Kirkosaros, where the Nile divides and runs to Pelusium and Canobas, while as for the rest of Egypt, they assign it partly to Libya and partly to Arabia. If, I say, we should follow this account, we should thereby declare that in former times the Egyptians had no land to live in, for, as we have seen, their delta at any rate is alluvial, and has appeared, so to speak, lately, as the Egyptians themselves say and as my opinion is. If then at the first there was no land for them to live in, why did they waste their labor to prove that they had come into being before all other men? They needed not to have made trial of the children to see what language they would first utter. However, I am not of opinion that the Egyptians came into being at the same time as that which is called by the Ionians the Delta, but that they existed always ever since the human race came into being, and that as their land advanced forwards, many of them were left in their first abodes and many came down gradually to the lower parts. At least it is certain that in old times Thebes had the name of Egypt, and of this 23 the circumference measures 6,120 furlongs. 16. If then we judge aright of these matters, the opinion of the Ionians about Egypt is not sound, but if the judgment of the Ionians is right, I declare that neither the Hellenes nor the Ionians themselves know how to reckon, since they say that the whole earth is made up of 3 divisions, Europe, Asia, and Libya, for they ought to count in addition to these the delta of Egypt, since it belongs neither to Asia nor to Libya, for at least it cannot be the river Nile by this reckoning which divides Asia from Libya. 24 But the Nile is cleft at the point of this delta so as to flow round it, and the result is that this land would come between Asia and Libya. 25. 17. We dismiss then the opinion of the Ionians, and express a judgment of our own in this matter also, that Egypt is all that land which is inhabited by Egyptians, just as Cilicia is that which is inhabited by Cilicians, and Assyria that which is inhabited by Assyrians, and we know of no boundary properly speaking between Asia and Libya except the borders of Egypt. If however we shall adopt the opinion which is commonly held by the Hellenes, we shall suppose that the whole of Egypt, beginning from the cataract 26 and the city of Elephantine, is divided into 2 parts, and that it thus partakes of both the names, since one side will thus belong to Libya and the other to Asia, for the Nile from the cataract onwards flows to the sea, cutting Egypt through the midst, and as far as the city of Kirkosaros the Nile flows in one single stream, but from this city onwards it is parted into 3 ways, and one, which is called the Pelusian mouth, turns towards the east, the second of the ways goes towards the west, and this is called the Canobic mouth, but that one of the ways which is straight runs thus: when the river in its course downwards comes to the point of the delta, then it cuts the delta through the midst and so issues out to the sea. In this we have 27 a portion of the water of the river which is not the smallest nor the least famous, and it is called the Sebennytic mouth. There are also 2 other mouths which part off from the Sebennytic and go to the sea, and these are called, one the Saitic, the other the Mendesian mouth. The Balbitinitic and Bucolic mouths, on the other hand, are not natural but made by digging. 18. Moreover, also the answer given by the oracle of Ammon bears witness in support of my opinion that Egypt is of the extent which I declare it to be in my account, and of this answer I heard after I had formed my own opinion about Egypt. For those of the city of Maria and of Apis, dwelling in the parts of Egypt which border on Libya, being of opinion themselves that they were Libyans and not Egyptians, and also being burdened by the rules of religious service, because they desired not to be debarred from the use of cow's flesh, sent to Ammon saying that they had not in common with the Egyptians, for they dwelt outside the delta and agreed with them in nothing, and they said they desired that it might be lawful for them to eat everything without distinction. The god, however, did not permit them to do so, but said that that land which was Egypt which the Nile came over and watered, and that those were Egyptians who dwelling below the city of Elephantine drank of that river. Thus it was answered to them by the oracle about this. 19. And the Nile, when it is in flood, goes over not only the delta but also of the land which is called Libyan and of that which is called Arabian, sometimes as much as 2 days' journey on each side, and at times even more than this or at times less. As regards the nature of the river, neither from the priests nor yet from any other man was I able to obtain any knowledge, and I was desirous especially to learn from them about these matters, namely why the Nile comes down increasing in volume from the summer solstice onwards for 100 days, and then, when it has reached the number of these days, turns and goes back, failing in its stream, so that through the whole winter season it continues to be low, and until the summer solstice returns. Of none of these things was I able to receive any account from the Egyptians, when I inquired of them what power the Nile has whereby it is of a nature opposite to that of other rivers. And I made inquiry, desiring to know both this which I say and also why, unlike all other rivers, it does not give rise to any breezes blowing from it. 20. However, some of the Hellenes who desired to gain distinction for cleverness have given an account of this water in 3 different ways, two of these I do not think it worthwhile even to speak of except only to indicate their nature, of which the one says that the Etesian winds are the cause that makes the river rise, by preventing the Nile from flowing out into the sea. But often the Etesian winds fail, and yet the Nile does the same work as it is wont to do, and moreover, if these were the cause, all the other rivers also which flow in a direction opposed to the Etesian winds ought to have been affected in the same way as the Nile, and even more, inasmuch as they are smaller and present to them a feebler flow of stream. But there are many of these rivers in Syria and many also in Libya, and they are affected in no such manner as the Nile. 21. The second way shows more ignorance than that which has been mentioned, and it is more marvelous to tell. 28. For it says that the river produces these effects because it flows from the ocean, and that the ocean flows round the whole earth. 22. The third of the ways is much the most specious, but nevertheless it is the most mistaken of all, for indeed this way has no more truth in it than the rest, alleging as it does that the Nile flows from melting snow, whereas it flows out of Libya through the midst of the Ethiopians, and so comes out into Egypt. How then should it flow from snow, when it flows from the hottest parts to those which are cooler? And indeed most of the facts are such as to convince a man, one at least who is capable of reasoning about such matters, that it is not at all likely that it flows from snow. 29. The first and greatest evidence is afforded by the winds, which blow hot from these regions. The second is that the land is rainless always and without frost, whereas after snow has fallen rain must necessarily come within 5 days, so that if it snowed in those parts rain would fall there. The third evidence is afforded by the people dwelling there, who are of a black color by reason of the burning heat. Moreover, kites and swallows remain there through the year and do not leave the land, and cranes flying from the cold weather which comes on in the region of Scythia come regularly to these parts for wintering. If then it snowed ever so little in that land through which the Nile flows and in which it has its rise, none of these things would take place, as necessity compels us to admit. 23. As for him who talked about the ocean, he carried his tale into the region of the unknown, and so he need not be refuted. 30. Since I for my part know of no river ocean existing, but I think that Homer or one of the poets who were before him invented the name and introduced it into his verse. 24. If however after I have found fault with the opinions proposed, I am bound to declare an opinion of my own about the matters which are in doubt, I will tell what to my mind is the reason why the Nile increases in the summer. In the winter season the sun, being driven away from his former path through the heaven 31 by the stormy winds, comes to the upper parts of Libya. If one would set forth the matter in the shortest way, all has now been said. For whatever region this god approaches most and stands directly above, this it may reasonably be supposed is most in want of water, and its native streams of rivers are dried up most. 25. However, to set it forth at greater length, thus it is, the sun passing in his course by the upper parts of Libya, does thus, that is to say, since at all times the air in those parts is clear and the country is warm, because there are no cold winds. 32. And passing through it the sun does just as he was wont to do in the summer, when going through the midst of the heaven, that is he draws to himself the water, and having drawn it he drives it away to the upper parts of the country, and the winds take it up and scattering it abroad melt it into rain. So it is natural that the winds which blow from this region, namely the south and southwest winds, should be much the most rainy of all the winds. I think however that the sun does not send away from himself all the water of the Nile of each year, but that he also lets some remain behind with himself. Then when the winter becomes milder, the sun returns back again to the midst of the heaven, and from that time onwards he draws equally from all rivers, but in the meanwhile they flow in large volume, since water of rain mingles with them in great quantity, because their country receives rain then and is filled with torrent streams. In summer however they are weak, since not only the showers of rain fail then, but also they are drawn by the sun. The Nile however, alone of all rivers, not having rain and being drawn by the sun, naturally flows during this time of winter in much less than its proper volume, that is much less than in summer. 33. For then it is drawn equally with all the other waters, but in winter it bears the burden alone. Thus I suppose the sun to be the cause of these things. 26. He is also the cause in my opinion that the air in these parts is dry, since he makes it so by scorching up his path through the heaven. 34. Thus summer prevails always in the upper parts of Libya. If however the station of the seasons had been changed, and where now in the heaven are placed the north wind in winter, there was the station of the south wind and of the midday, and where now is placed the south wind, there was the north. If this had been so, the sun being driven from the midst of the heaven by the winter and the north wind would go to the upper parts of Europe, just as now he comes to the upper parts of Libya, and passing in his course throughout the whole of Europe. I suppose that he would do to the Ister that which he now works upon the Nile. 27. As to the breeze, why none blows from the river, my opinion is that from very hot places it is not natural that anything should blow, and that a breeze is wont to blow from something cold. 28. Let these matters then be as they are and as they were at the first, but as to the sources of the Nile, not one either of the Egyptians or of the Libyans or of the Hellenes, who came to speech with me, professed to know anything, except the scribe of the sacred treasury of Athene at the city of Sais in Egypt. To me, however, this man seemed not to be speaking seriously when he said that he had certain knowledge of it, and he said as follows, namely that there were two mountains of which the tops ran up to a sharp point, situated between the city of Syene, which is in the district of Thebes, and Elephantine, and the names of the mountains were, of the one Crophi and of the other Mophi. From the middle between these two mountains flowed, he said, the sources of the Nile, which were fathomless in depth, and half of the water flowed to Egypt and towards the north wind, the other half to Ethiopia and the south wind. As for the fathomless depth of the source, he said that Psammetichos king of Egypt came to a trial of this matter, for he had a rope twisted of many thousands of fathoms and let it down in this place, and it found no bottom. By this the scribe, if this which he told me was really as he said, gave me to understand 35 that there were certain strong eddies there and a backward flow, and that since the water dashed against the mountains, therefore the sounding line could not come to any bottom when it was let down. 29. From no other person was I able to learn anything about this matter, but for the rest I learned so much as here follows by the most diligent inquiry. 36. For I went myself as an eyewitness as far as the city of Elephantine, and from that point onwards I gathered knowledge by report. From the city of Elephantine as one goes up the river there is country which slopes steeply, so that here one must attach ropes to the vessel on both sides, as one fastens an ox, and so make one's way onward, and if the rope break, the vessel is gone at once, carried away by the violence of the stream. Through this country it is a voyage of about 4 days in length, and in this part the Nile is winding like the river Meander, and the distance amounts to 12 skoines, which one must traverse in this manner. Then you will come to a level plain, in which the Nile flows round an island named Techamso. Now in the regions above Elephantine there dwell Ethiopians at once succeeding, who also occupy half of the island, 37, and Egyptians the other half. Adjoining this island there is a great lake, round which dwell Ethiopian nomad tribes, and when you have sailed through this you will come to the stream of the Nile again, which flows into this lake. After this you will disembark and make a journey by land of 40 days, for in the Nile sharp rocks stand forth out of the water, and there are many reefs, by which it is not possible for a vessel to pass. Then after having passed through this country in the 40 days which I have said, you will embark again in another vessel and sail for 12 days, and after this you will come to a great city called Meroe. This city is said to be the mother city of all the other Ethiopians, and they who dwell in it reverence of the gods Zeus and Dionysus alone, and these they greatly honor, and they have an oracle of Zeus established, and make warlike marches whensoever this god commands them by prophesying, and to whatsoever place he commands. 30. Sailing from this city you will come to the deserters in another period of time equal to that in which you came from Elephantine to the mother city of the Ethiopians. Now the name of these deserters is Asmak, and this word signifies, when translated into the tongue of the Hellenes, those who stand on the left hand of the king. These were 240,000 Egyptians of the warrior class, who revolted and went over to the Ethiopians for the following cause. In the reign of Psammetichos garrisons were set, one towards the Ethiopians at the city of Elephantine, another towards the Arabians and Assyrians at Daphne of Pelusium, and another towards Libya at Maria. And even in my own time the garrisons of the Persians too were ordered in the same manner as these were in the reign of Psammetichos, for both at Elephantine and at Daphne the Persians have outposts. The Egyptians then of whom I speak had served as outposts for 3 years, and no one relieved them from their guard. Accordingly they took counsel together, and adopting a common plan they all in a body revolted from Psammetichos and set out for Ethiopia. Hearing this Psammetichos set forth in pursuit, And when he came up with them, he entreated them much and endeavored to persuade them not to desert the gods of their country and their children and wives, upon which it is said that one of them pointed to his privy member and said that wherever this was, there would they have both children and wives. When these came to Ethiopia, they gave themselves over to the king of the Ethiopians, and he rewarded them as follows. There were certain of the Ethiopians who had come to be at variance with him, and he bade them drive these out and dwell in their land. So since these men settled in the land of the Ethiopians have come to be of milder manners, from having learnt the customs of the Egyptians. 31. The Nile then, besides that part of its course which is in Egypt, is known as far as a 4 months' journey by river and land, for that is the number of months which are found by reckoning to be spent in going from Elephantine to these deserters, and the river runs from the west in the setting of the sun. But what comes after that no one can clearly say, for this land is desert by reason of the burning heat. 32. Thus much however I heard from men of Cyrene, who told me that they had been to the oracle of Ammon, and had come to speech with Eteurchos king of the Ammonians, and it happened that after speaking of other matters they fell to discourse about the Nile and how no one knew the sources of it, and Eteurchos said that once there had come to him men of the Nasamonians, this is a Libyan race which dwells in the Syrtis, and also in the land to the east of the Syrtis reaching to no great distance. And when the Nasamonians came and were asked by him whether they were able to tell him anything more than he knew about the desert parts of Libya, they said that there had been among them certain sons of chief men, who were of unruly disposition, and these when they grew up to be men had devised various other extravagant things, and also they had told off by lot 5 of themselves to go to see the desert parts of Libya and to try whether they could discover more than those who had previously explored furthest, for in those parts of Libya which are by the northern sea, beginning from Egypt and going as far as the headland of Solois, which is the extreme point of Libya, Libyans, and of them many races, extend along the whole coast, except so much as the Hellenes and Phoenicians hold, but in the upper parts, which lie above the sea coast and above those people whose land comes down to the sea, Libya is full of wild beasts, and in the parts above the land of wild beasts it is full of sand, terribly waterless and utterly desert. These young men then, said they, being sent out by their companions well furnished with supplies of water and provisions, went first through the inhabited country, and after they had passed through this they came to the country of wild beasts, and after this they passed through the desert, making their journey towards the west wind, and having passed through a great tract of sand in many days, they saw at last trees growing in a level place, and having come up to them, they were beginning to pluck the fruit which was upon the trees, but as they began to pluck it, there came upon them small men, of less stature than men of the common size, and these seized them and carried them away, and neither could the Nasamonians understand anything of their speech, nor could those who were carrying them off understand anything of the speech of the Nasamonians, and they led them, so it was said, through very great swamps, and after passing through these they came to a city in which all the men were in size like those who carried them off and in color of skin black, and by the city ran a great river, which ran from the west towards the sunrising, and in it were seen crocodiles. 33. Of the account given by Eteurchos the Ammonian let so much suffice as is here said, except that, as the men of Cyrene told me, he alleged that the Nasamonians returned safe home, and that the people to whom they had come were all wizards. Now this river which ran by the city, Eteurchos conjectured to be the Nile, and moreover reason compels us to think so, for the Nile flows from Libya and cuts Libya through in the midst, and as I conjecture, judging of what is not known by that which is evident to the view, it starts at a distance from its mouth equal to that of the Ister. For the river Ister begins from the Keltoi in the city of Pyrene and so runs that it divides Europe in the midst. Now the Keltoi are outside the pillars of Heracles and border upon the Kynesians, who dwell furthest towards the sunset of all those who have their dwelling in Europe, and the Ister ends, having its course through the whole of Europe, by flowing into the Euxine Sea at the place where the Milesians have their settlement of Istria. 34. Now the Ister, since it flows through land which is inhabited, is known by the reports of many, but of the sources of the Nile no one can give an account, for the part of Libya through which it flows is uninhabited and desert. About its course, however, so much as it was possible to learn by the most diligent inquiry has been told, and it runs out into Egypt. Now Egypt lies nearly opposite to the mountain districts of Cilicia, and from thence to Sinope, which lies upon the Euxine Sea, is a journey in the same straight line of 5 days for a man without encumbrance, 3701 and Sinope lies opposite to the place where the Ister runs out into the sea. Thus I think that the Nile passes through the whole of Libya and is of equal measure with the Ister. Of the Nile then let so much suffice as has been said. 35. Of Egypt however I shall make my report at length, because it has wonders more in number than any other land, and works too it has to show as much as any land, which are beyond expression great. For this reason then more shall be said concerning it. The Egyptians in agreement with their climate, which is unlike any other, and with the river, which shows a nature different from all other rivers, established for themselves manners and customs in a way opposite to other men in almost all matters, for among them the women frequent the market and carry on trade, while the men remain at home and weave, and whereas others weave pushing the woof upwards, the Egyptians push it downwards. The men carry their burdens upon their heads and the women upon their shoulders. The women make water standing up and the men crouching down. They ease themselves in their houses and they eat without in the streets, alleging as reason for this that it is right to do secretly the things that are unseemly though necessary, but those which are not unseemly, in public. No woman is a minister either of male or female divinity, but men of all, both male and female. To support their parents the sons are in no way compelled, if they do not desire to do so, but the daughters are forced to do so, be they never so unwilling. 36. The priests of the gods in other lands wear long hair, but in Egypt they shave their heads. Among other men the custom is that in mourning those whom the matter concerns most nearly have their hair cut short, but the Egyptians, when deaths occur, let their hair grow long, both that on the head and that on the chin, having before been close shaven. Other men have their daily living separated from beasts, but the Egyptians have theirs together with beasts. Other men live on wheat and barley. But to any one of the Egyptians who makes his living on these it is a great reproach. They make their bread of maize. 38. Which some call spelt. 39. They knead dough with their feet and clay with their hands, with which also they gather up dung. And whereas other men, except such as have learned otherwise from the Egyptians, have their members as nature made them, the Egyptians practice circumcision. As to garments, the men wear two each and the women but one, and whereas others make fast the rings and ropes of the sails outside the ship, the Egyptians do this inside. Finally, in the writing of characters and reckoning with pebbles, while the Hellenes carry the hand from the left to the right, the Egyptians do this from the right to the left, and doing so they say that they do it themselves rightwise and the Hellenes leftwise, and they use two kinds of characters for writing, of which the one kind is called sacred and the other common. 40. 37. They are religious excessively beyond all other men, and with regard to this they have customs as follows. They drink from cups of bronze and rinse them out every day, and not some only do this but all. They wear garments of linen always newly washed, and this they make a special point of practice. They circumcise themselves for the sake of cleanliness, preferring to be clean rather than comely. The priests shave themselves all over their body every other day, so that no lice or any other foul thing may come to be upon them when they minister to the gods. And the priests wear garments of linen only and sandals of papyrus, and any other garment they may not take nor other sandals. These wash themselves in cold water twice in the day and twice again in the night, and other religious services they perform, one may almost say, of infinite number. 41. They enjoy also good things not a few, for they do not consume or spend anything of their own substance, but there is sacred bread baked for them and they have each great quantity of flesh of oxen and geese coming in to them each day, and also wine of grapes is given to them, but it is not permitted to them to taste of fish. Beans moreover the Egyptians do not at all sow in their land, and those which grow they neither eat raw nor boil for food, nay the priests do not endure even to look upon them, thinking this to be an unclean kind of pulse, and there is not one priest only for each of the gods but many, and of them one is chief priest, and whenever a priest dies his son is appointed to his place. 38. The males of the ox kind they consider to belong to Epiphos, and on account of him they test them in the following manner. If the priest sees one single black hair upon the beast he counts it not clean for sacrifice, and one of the priests who is appointed for the purpose makes investigation of these matters, both when the beast is standing upright and when it is lying on its back, drawing out its tongue moreover, to see if it is clean in respect of the appointed signs, which I shall tell of in another part of the history. 42. He looks also at the hairs of the tail to see if it has them growing in the natural manner, and if it be clean in respect of all these things, he marks it with a piece of papyrus, rolling this round the horns, and then when he has plastered sealing earth over it he sets upon it the seal of his signet ring, and after that they take the animal away. But for one who sacrifices a beast not sealed the penalty appointed is death. 39. In this way then the beast is tested, and their appointed manner of sacrifice is as follows: they lead the sealed beast to the altar where they happen to be sacrificing and then kindle a fire. After that, having poured libations of wine over the altar so that it runs down upon the victim, and having called upon the god, they cut its throat, and having cut its throat they sever the head from the body. The body then of the beast they flay, but upon the head 43 they make many imprecations first, and then they who have a market and Hellenes sojourning among them for trade, these carry it to the marketplace and sell it, while they who have no Hellenes among them cast it away into the river, and this is the form of imprecation which they utter upon the heads, praying that if any evil be about to befall either themselves who are offering sacrifice or the land of Egypt in general, it may come rather upon this head. Now as regards the heads of the beasts which are sacrificed and the pouring over them of the wine, all the Egyptians have the same customs equally for all their sacrifices, and by reason of this custom none of the Egyptians eat of the head either of this or of any other kind of animal.